Hi, my name is Rob Lamontagne, and today we're going to talk about the numbers. We're going to talk about key performance indicators and how to use them because numbers don't lie. Let the numbers tell the story. Too many investors today try and make the numbers tell the story they want. It's important that you listen to the numbers in your real estate investment journey. Real estate investment is full of lingo, full of terms and terminology that you need to learn and understand in order to be able to discuss real estate with real estate agents, with mortgage brokers, and with other investors. Today, we'll discuss some of these terms and we'll talk about how to use some of the key performance indicators. So, going back to basics, income minus operating expenses is net operating income or NOI. Net operating income less debt service is cash flow. This you need to commit to memory. Income minus expenses equals NOI, and NOI minus debt service is cash flow. It is the first of the basics. So, starting with income is anything that puts money in your pocket. Most people think of rent, laundry, and parking as the components of their income, but there are a lot of other things that you can actually use to increase the revenue from your properties. You can do storage, signage, cell towers, solar panels, vending machines, fitness rooms, party rooms, lounges, games rooms, guest suites, cleaning services, cable and internet, furniture, advertising and signage. You can increase rents. The list of ways to generate additional income is really almost limitless. It's up to you as a landlord to use creative thinking in order to think about the ways that you can increase your revenue. And of course, we always have to remember that whatever revenue we have, it's offset by any vacancy that we have. Then we have operating expenses. They are the things that take money out of your pocket. Again, most people quickly jump and say property taxes, insurance, and utilities. But the scope of operating expenses is much larger than that and is actually one of the big reasons that real estate investors have problems. They don't properly consider all of the costs in operating the property. Other things that you should consider are bank fees, garbage collection, lawn maintenance, rental equipment, cleaning, snow and ice removal, advertising, cable or internet, paralegal costs, tenanting costs, delinquency costs, and of course, maintenance and property management. These are two key things that are often forgotten. Now, in the absence of an income and expense statement, we have to estimate some of these values. For vacancy, always use 5% of gross income or CMHC's published vacancy. This is what your lender is going to use when you go for a mortgage. So if it's good enough for the lender, this is what you should use as well. For expenses, if you're trying to run numbers on a single family home or a duplex, use 30% of gross income as the expense ratio. For a triplex or a fourplex, use 35%. For a fiveplex or a sixplex, use 45%. And if it's greater than a sixplex, use 50% of gross income. Now, again, if you have actual income and expense statements, you want to use those. But in the absence of actual numbers, you want to use these as your estimates. Moving to debt service is any and all costs associated with the payments of all money borrowed, principal, interest, and fees. This includes if you have additional financing, if you have second mortgages, third mortgages, private loans, lines of credit, all of these have to be figured into your debt service costs. And understand that your debt service costs are going to be affected by your interest rate, how your interest is calculated, the amortization, the frequency of payment, the principal pay down, and your fees and costs. So when we're doing our numbers, we use some key assumptions. Most financial statements will include pro forma income with no vacancy. It is important to make sure that you always include a vacancy assumption in your numbers. We use the greater of 5% of gross income or the CMHC posted vacancy for the area because that is what your vendor is going to use. Most financial statements will include pro forma expenses without management or maintenance. It's important to understand that it's going to cost you money to manage and maintain the building. Always use somewhere between 5 to 10% of gross income for management. I seem to be able to get decent property management for somewhere between 7 and 8%, but standard numbers for property management can run from 5% to 10%. And always include a base maintenance amount in your initial numbers. I use a sliding scale depending on the age of the building because an older building is going to cost you more in maintenance. So I use 5% of gross income for buildings under 15 years old, 10% for buildings between 15 and 30 years old, and 15% for buildings over 30 years old. And then once I get the inspection report, then I'll adjust for the actual condition. Most ads will post financing based on the best current interest rate. You cannot use the current interest rate in your numbers. You always have to provide a contingency for what will happen to you if you have to renew the mortgage at a higher rate. So, as a base assumption, always do your numbers with the current 5 year posted rate plus 2%. And this is what gives you some contingency if you have to renew at a higher rate. So, again, income less operating expenses is net operating income, and net operating income less debt service is your cash flow. Now we're ready to talk about key performance indicators. A key performance indicator is just a number. It's a number based on actual income and expenses, and it's there to help suggest how a property might perform financially. It's a starting point for analyzing investment property, and it's not a replacement for due diligence or verification of the numbers. Once you have actual numbers and once you're able to verify the numbers, this is the next step. And it's very important that you don't think that just looking at your key performance indicator is going to give you an absolute answer. So, the key performance indicators that we're going to look at today are the 1% rule, cost per unit, gross rent multiple, cap rate, coverage ratio, cash flow per unit per month, and cash on cash return. Your 1% rule is one of your most basic key performance indicators. It's essentially just the purchase price times 1%. So if the monthly rent is 1% or more of the purchase price, then the property may cash flow positive. Otherwise, the property is unlikely to cash flow positive. It's a really high level indicator and it tells you if you want to investigate further. So if you're sitting there and your 1% rule is giving you a value of one half of 1%, that property is not likely a property that you want to pursue. If, on the other hand, it's at 0.9%, then you might find yourself thinking that, well, I might be able to get a better price on it and I might be able to swing it so that we're close. So, again, the 1% rule, 1% of purchase price, high level indicator. As an example, if you have a purchase price of 300,000, the 1% rule is $3,000. If your monthly rent is 3,200, then there's a good chance that your property may cash flow positive. If your rent, on the other hand, is 2,400, then the property is unlikely to cash flow positive. Cost per unit. Cost per unit is just the purchase price divided by the number of units. And your target really depends on the location and the size of the unit. There's no general number that you can really use here. But if your purchase price was 300,000 and your number of units was 4, then your cost per unit is 75,000. It's again, it's a high level indicator. If you start to see cost per unit in the 200 or $300,000 range, then you can be pretty sure that you're not going to be able to make this property cash flow positive. If, on the other hand, your cost per unit is $100,000 or less, then chances are you're going to be able to look at this property and do some numbers on it that may make sense. Gross rent multiplier, or GRM. GRM is the purchase price divided by the gross income. So Simply put, it's the number of times that the rent goes into your purchase price. When you're looking at targets, you may cash flow positive with a GRM between 5 and 7. You will cash flow positive generally under 5. So, if your purchase price is 300,000 and your monthly rent is 5,000 for an annual rent of 60,000, that means that the GRM is 5. That is a property that there is a good chance will cash flow positive. Your cap rate takes your key performance indicator to the next level because it adds an extra level of accuracy. It uses the actual NOI divided by the purchase price. And if you remember, your NOI is actually your income less your expenses. It's most useful in analyzing properties of 6 or more units. So your target really depends on the interest rates. And when you're looking at cap rate at 7% interest, you're going to start to see your property cash flow positive around the 8% cap rate range. And at 5% interest, you're going to start to see your property cash flow positive around the 7% cap rate range. So as an example, if your NOI is 24,000 and your purchase price is 300,000, you've got a cap rate of 8%. Your coverage ratio is what the bank or your lender is going to use to determine whether or not they're going to lend you money. Your cap rate is based on your net operating income and your cost to service your mortgage. So that provides a ratio which tells you whether or not you're making enough money to pay your debt. So as an example, if our NOI is 1500 and our debt service is 1500, that gives us a coverage ratio of 1. What this means is that you're making just enough money to pay your debt service. You're breaking even and you have no contingency. From a lender's point of view, that is a no-go. If we look at an NOI of 1500 and your debt service is 2000, your coverage ratio is only 0.75. This means that after you've paid your expenses, you only have enough money left to not even cover your mortgage. You are in a loss position, and your lender is not going to like that at all. If, on the other hand, your NOI was 1500 and your debt service was 1250, that gives you a coverage ratio of 1.2. So you're making enough after expenses to pay for your debt service and a little profit. That is generally considered the minimum target for a lender is 1.2. So they may lend you money there, they may not. Typically, the lenders like to see 1.25 or better. On to the next example, if our NOI is 1500 and our debt service is only 1150, we have a debt service ratio, a coverage ratio of 1.3. Now we're making enough to pay our debts and pay our mortgage, and that is a level that the bank is quite comfortable with. Now, if we go a little bit to the other extreme and we see an NOI of 1500 with a debt service of only 750, that gives us a coverage ratio of 2. You would think that the lender would like that. The NOI is twice the debt service. We have enough money to pay our mortgage and we have a lot of money left over. But the banks really don't like that because you're making too much money. Typically, in a case like that the bank is going to want you to accelerate your payment of the debt. So instead of giving you a 30-year amortization, they might want to move to 25 or maybe even 20. Cash flow per unit. Cash flow per unit is cash flow divided by the number of units. Here we tend to target somewhere between $75 to $100 per month per door as a minimum. So, as an example, if our cash flow is $8,000 and we have 6 units, that means that our cash flow per unit is $111.11. Cash on cash return is cash flow divided by the money in the property. Here, it is really important to understand cash on cash. The money in the property is what is key. The return is based on the money actually invested, your down payment, your legal fees, your land transfer tax, if you are using your own funds. If you are doing 100% financing, then your cash on cash return would be infinite because your money in the property is zero. So, what we are looking for is a targeted minimum of about 30% per year. So, if our cash flow is 8,000 annually and our money invested is 30,000, that's a cash on cash return of 26.67%. And again, remember, cash on cash is based on actual money invested in the property. So, as a recap, our 1% rule is monthly rent should be at least 1% of the purchase price. Cost per unit is price divided by the number of units, and that depends on the location and size of the units. The GRM is the price divided by the gross revenue, and we want that to be 6 or less generally, and ideally it looks nicer as you're approaching 5. Your cap rate is your NOI divided by your price, and here you tend to be looking for at least 8% if you have a 7% interest rate. Your coverage ratio is your net operating income divided by your debt financing per year, and you want that to be at least 1.2 and preferably 1.25 to 1.3. Your cash flow per unit per month is the cash flow per year divided by the number of units times 12, and you want that to be at least $75 to $100 a month. Cash on cash return is cash flow per year divided by the money you've put in, and you want that to be at least 30%. Now we're going to talk a little bit about estimating mortgage payments. If you're sitting down in a restaurant or at a Tim Hortons and you're trying to figure out your cash flow, you're going to want to be able to estimate your mortgage payments quickly. For that, we use the James Bond formula. It's a quick, easy way to calculate mortgage payments, and it's based on principal and interest with interest rate of 7% per year and amortization of 25 years. And essentially, all you do is you multiply 007 times the principal of the mortgage. And that's why they call it the James Bond formula. So, as an example, if we have a mortgage principal of 200,000, then multiplying the 200,000 by 007, we have a monthly mortgage payment of about 1,400, and that gives us annual mortgage payments of 16,800. That is a short summary of key performance indicators, how to look at the numbers, and how to start looking at your properties.